do think sometimes we get caught up in things that symbolize status or things that symbolize like where it's at, like, where the hot things are, like where you might be able to get more visibility, more exposure. Yeah.
And I think the same thing can go for like a brand. It's a lot of people will do like what they think other people want versus having like a personal identity for the brand and being able to stand out. It's like, I'm going to do what everybody else is doing because that's what I think that people like. And I think it just comes down to authenticity for everything.
Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of the Minor Detail Podcast. I'm your host, Khaila Ariel, and like I always say, I'm so grateful that you are tuning in today. Listen, we have a very, very, very special guest, which another thing I always say because I'm super biased. My guests are amazing, but I can't wait for y'all to hear today's conversation, okay? We're getting into fashion, we're getting into entrepreneurship, and we're getting into building your brand from the ground up. One thing that I admire about any woman, any Black woman who can literally get it out of the mud and just create from her own brain, bring her passions to life, it just inspires me. And I know that you guys will walk away feeling so encouraged, so empowered to just do the things that are on your heart. So without further ado, I welcome you, Miss Ashlee of House of Rehab. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Listen, I love your work. I love your artistry. I love everything that you do. I feel like, I don't know, I have like known you but not known you for like 3 years now. So I'm so glad that you're here today.
Yes. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, I love it. Well, I want to dive in a little bit just so listeners can like learn a little bit more about you, what you're doing, about the brand. Tell us a little bit about how you got started and how House of Rehab came to life.
So we have been in business since 2014. So next year will be our 10-year anniversary. The business has been a lot of things. It started with a t-shirt and a sweater that said "Fashion Made Me Do It," which is a saying that I came up with. And then from there, we did like rehabbing clothes. So I would thrift things and kind of remake them and make them new. And then I would say since like 2018, I've done like my designs. And then in 2019 went into like production and actually like doing my designs and actually getting them made. So
yes, I love that. It's so funny too because when I was introing you, I was like thinking of Fashion Made Me Do It. If you don't know Fashion Made Me Do It, then you know Ashlee made me do it. Listen, you made the girls do it. You're making them do it, and that's what matters. I think it's so cool too. House of Rehab, like the name and how it came to life. I think that when I think of like House of Rehab, I almost go like retail therapy or like, needing to just like kind of get your fix a little bit or maybe like needing to stop. Yes. But what's like, okay, so you said backtrack, 2014 is when the brand started. Did it start from just like a love of fashion or, a love for creating your own designs? What was that journey like of really, inception to like bringing it to life? You walked us through kind of like the timeline, but what were like those points or those like major markers of really, bringing the brand to life?
So I've always wanted to be a fashion designer, probably for as long as I can remember. Probably when I was like 8 or 9, I would watch all the runway shows, learn about all the designers, where they went to school. So I was getting college catalogs because I knew like I wanted to go to design school. I ended up not going to school for design. I went for merchandising and product development, which is like the business side of fashion. Graduated, and then I went to work. I worked in retail, which I've always worked in retail probably since I was like 16. And then I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, this isn't what I want to do. And then I still wanted to do something with fashion. And I was like, well, I'm going to start a business just so I have like some type of outlet for that. And then that's just where like the business started, and we've just evolved like over the years.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard is like you kind of finding your passion, like knowing your passion, but finding it even more so along the way, like knowing what you wanted to do versus like what you no longer wanted to do. How was like the experience with getting a better understanding or a deep of understanding of like truly wanting to follow that passion, follow those dreams. Because one thing I think that a lot of people, and myself included, might deal with is you know what you want to do, but you don't necessarily know how to bring it to life. Or maybe like taking that leap of faith. You know what I mean? Because you also worked in corporate.
Yep.
So at some point you had to like say goodbye, bet on yourself, and really like try this new thing out. What was that experience like?
So I've always worked and had the business up until last year. And so I learned a lot from those jobs. When I started working corporate side of retail, I just took like, okay, they run their business like this, so this is how I'm going to run my company, and just took everything that I learned from those jobs and implemented it into my business. And I did that until I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And it became overwhelming. Like the business was growing, and then also my job was getting more demanding. So it was like, okay, I have to pick and choose which one I want to do. And so just like, okay, I'm going to just focus on the business and see how far I can take it.
Yeah. Where were you when you first started your business? Like, where were you physically located?
So I was in Detroit when I started the company. Yeah.
And so now you're in Texas. How was that transition like? Did you really feel a difference in moving from one state to another with the business, or was it just kind of like the ebbs and flows of like just moving physically, but you still, you know, had your business going on the side?
I don't think it had too much impact. I will say, I think I lived in Detroit for all my life aside of when I went to college, which wasn't that far away. I will say moving away, you kind of realize like for a long time, Detroit was my world. Like that was it. And so moving away and you're in a different climate, kind of realizing like, okay, seasons are different here. And it just kind of opens up your mind to how customers in other states or other areas, other climates may work, and just planning the business around that. Like I'm just used to, okay, it's October, it's cold, like, but it's not cold everywhere. Just kind of like, just taking that into account and consideration and being like, okay, well, there's more out here to expand to.
You got to make those adjustments. That's interesting too, because I think that, which I'm going off script, but it's inspiring because I feel like what people don't think about maybe are like the real life adjustments happening behind the scenes. Like as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you have like real life things happening. Like you still have family, you still have friends, like you might have relationships and things like that, but you also have to be locked in. You know what I mean? So hearing that you literally move physical positions, like I think that's a big deal because you're having to get adjusted to so many life things at once. What has it been like for you, not necessarily staying focused, but like really honoring all that you're doing and like being disciplined in that, you know?
I think it's something that you like have to make a choice on. Like I knew I don't want to like work corporate for the rest of my life. I want this thing to be the best that it can be. And so if that's something that I want, then I'm going to have to do the things that align with that ultimate goal. So I've always been focused on the business. There were times where I would say pre-2018, I was like inconsistent with it, and then finally I was like, okay, like let me try this, do everything I want to do for a year, see if it works, and then if it works, fine, I'll keep doing it. If it doesn't work, then I won't. And like that really is something that helped me like get focused and be like, okay, I'm actually going to do this and do everything that I wanted to do.
I love that. Speaking of inconsistencies, when I hear that, I think like challenges, right? Like some personal challenges. What were some of the kind of like markers that stood out the most to you in that year, in 2018, where you're like, okay, it's working. Like I can keep going. I can keep moving forward. Because I think I'm like that too, where I need to like show myself a little bit to believe it. But also I need that extra like push to remind me that it is working. You should keep going. What were some of those?
I think just literally just being like, okay, let me try this. And like, okay, people are responding to it. I'm seeing that I'm getting more consistent sales, even though it wasn't like a lot of sales. I'm like, okay, I went from maybe I might have one sale a month, and now I'm like, okay, I can get one sale a week. And just kind of seeing those results of, okay, if I continue to do this or I go down this path, then I can see how that reflects in the business. So let me just try and do more of that.
Yeah. So going back to kind of like you were getting into your flow, you were getting into your rhythm. What are more of those like watch out challenges that that come with like starting, I won't say a business necessarily because that's broad, but starting your own fashion label from the ground up? Like what are some of those things where looking back you're like, yeah, that's almost unavoidable. It comes with the, you know, the program, it comes with the process. Well, we're like, if any listeners, let's say, for example, who are in the same space, they're wanting to get started, maybe they don't know how, or they're in the middle of starting up and they're just a little frustrated because of what might be, you know, some of the challenges, what might be a little difficult.
I would say one of the things that people ask me about a lot is just, especially when it comes to like production and manufacturing, I think people are scared of like the trial and error phase. And it's like everything is not going to be perfect the first time that you try it, like, but you have to try something in order to get to that final result. Like I've sampled plenty of things and I'm like, okay, I don't like this. Like you don't know what it is that you don't know until you like try and figure it out. And I think a lot of people just get scared of actually trying it because they feel like it's going to go bad, but it has to go bad before you can figure out what's the good thing. So, and that's one thing, I'm not afraid of trying something and be like, okay, well, that didn't work. So let me figure it out. Or I should have done this. This would have gone better. And like putting that towards the next thing that I do. And I think that's just like the biggest thing is being not afraid to try something and learn from it if it doesn't work out.
Did you have any instances in the beginning where it just really was not working out? Like where you had to maybe switch vendors or switch, you know, production teams or whatever?
Yeah, I've tried a lot of stuff. I've been like, okay, this didn't work. This fabric, I should have done this, or I should have like spent a little more time testing this out. I tell people that all the time because people ask me like, oh, can you give me like a manufacturer? Just because I work with someone doesn't mean that they're the best people out. Like I've worked with one of my best selling items, which I don't have anymore, was our like jogger sets. I hated that manufacturer. Like
you're like, that's why we don't have it anymore.
Yeah, I hated that manufacturer, and the product was good and it was what I had for the time. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna try and find someone else and like do the research. I spent money trying other things until I found someone that was just as good as far as quality, but had better service. So yeah, I'm not afraid of like being like, okay, this isn't working, so let me figure out what we can do. But yeah, I think trying stuff and not being afraid of trying it is one of the biggest hurdles that people face and why people end up like giving up on their business.
Yeah, I feel like I could see that. Like I can see that being a reason why some people be a little more timid or like hesitant to get into it. Even like, let's say you have a lifestyle brand, right? Like it's not even fashion. Me, for example, have a podcast. I might want merch, but I'm like, where do I start when it even comes to finding vendors, finding items that make sense, putting them through like the testing process, like QAing, you know, making sure like the quality is there. That's like really mind blowing. And I feel like also could be expensive, right? When it comes to investing from a financial standpoint, building your brand. Was that ever super challenging for you? In like I guess, was it challenging you in a way where it almost made you like want to back off a little bit, or you were less determined, or has it always been like, have you always just like moved boldly in that area?
I think it definitely can be scary. Like the first time I wanted to put my designs into production, I spoke to someone and she was like, she had a factory that I could use. It was a friend of mine. She was in the fashion space and she told me, and it was like $1,200. And I was like, that's a lot of money. So I didn't do it. But then like, I think maybe like 2 years later, I was like, okay, I still want to do this thing. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to get the money to do this, because the feeling of still wanting to do it is not gonna go away. So I'm just gonna keep wasting time when I could have at least tried it. So, I mean, money is always like a factor in doing anything. But if it's something that you truly want to do, like
you're gonna figure it out.
Do it. Like I can blow $1,200 on stupid stuff. So let me at least put it towards something that I want and that I feel like I can invest in myself in.
Yeah, and it'll come back tenfold.
Right.
So when you say $1,200, is that just like to get the process started, to get samples? Because I'm like, I'm interested. I'm like, what is that? Because I'm like you. I'm like, that's an investment.
Yeah, so I think that was like to do a small run of pieces, and it was maybe like it might have been like 12 items. Like, it was not a lot of things. And that's like fabric. And that was with like a local factory in the US, and just like the process. And it was a small like run of pieces. So it was very scary. I didn't end up doing it at that time. I ended up like finding my own like manufacturer and doing the research. But yeah.
Yeah. Man, so that's like samples for real. Like, not samples, but like you don't have a big a big production where you're like, I'm gonna sell out to 100 people who pre-order. No. Oh my gosh. Well then, yeah, I see that. That makes sense. I feel like money is definitely one of those things that sometimes people can hold them back, and understandably so, right? I know that you were, for a long time, like you mentioned, balancing a corporate job and also, building the brand on the side. Was that a big funder of the business for a long time, like having that 9 to 5?
Not necessarily. So I would definitely say the business grew definitely 2019, and then probably up until like the beginning of this year. So the business was doing well for itself. So people always ask me like, why would you quit your job? I'm like, the business can do well for itself, but it cannot afford me. Like, that's an extra expense. I think that people don't realize, like, that's a salary. Now you're putting all of your weight on the business. And so that's why I worked for a long time. I'm like, the business can withstand itself, and I can take whatever money from the business, put it back into the business, and not have to worry about like, how am I going to buy groceries or pay for this? So I think working was like my money, and then the money that the business made was for the business. Yeah,
to put it back into it. That makes sense. That makes total sense. So let's talk about fashion industry for a little bit, because I'm curious. The girls meaning TikTok, but the girls have been talking about this past Fashion Week, New York Fashion Week specifically. And there's just like a lot of conversation around the fashion industry being oversaturated, New York Fashion Week no longer being like inspiring or as fun. There's a lot of influencers in this place and blah, 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 blah. I also saw that you went and attended as well. What's your hot take on the fashion industry right now, especially as, a trailblazer in your own right, with some of these like bigger fashion houses, but also just more so like the fashion scene as it relates to, influencers and new people in the space, because I do think some of those perspectives are fair. However, I don't necessarily agree with like it being oversaturated in the way that just because there are a lot of people, like you can't have breakthrough moments, you can't have breakthrough designs. So what's your thoughts on that?
I think there's two things. So because I read an article that was like, who is Fashion Week even for anymore or something. So Fashion Week originally was supposed to be designers show their pieces for the upcoming season. All of the like magazine editors, stylists come to the show to see what is going to be available for. So in September, they will show spring of 2024. And that way, magazine editors can say, I want to pull this for this magazine. I want to buy this to put into my store. And I think there's like a collision right now. There's people that are very like fashion purists, and like that's how Fashion Week is supposed to work. But Fashion Week is evolving at this point, especially with fast fashion. Like a lot of designers have changed to, I'm not going to show in September what my spring stuff is, because by the time we get to spring,
somebody else gonna make it.
Yeah, Zara and Fashion Nova are going to have already seen what I'm doing. So there are some designers that are like, I'm just doing a presentation of what I'm working on right now. As far as like the influencer thing, I think I agree and I disagree. I do think like anybody, if you want to go to Fashion Week, you should go. If you're into it and it's just something that's fun for you, go. I don't think it should be something that's like, oh, well, you're not good enough to come here. I do think that there is an influx of people that want to go to Fashion Week that just want to go because other people are going. They don't necessarily truly like fashion. They just feel like, I want to be an influencer, so this is where the influencers are, so I should go.
Yeah. I feel that though. Yeah. I'm gonna pause you only because I agree with that, and I do think sometimes we get caught up in things that symbolize status or things that symbolize like where it's at, like,
Yeah.
where the hot things are, like where you might be able to get more visibility, more exposure. And there's nothing wrong with that either, especially as it relates to wanting to grow your own personal brand. But I do feel like that is what, for me personally, as a creator, like that's what makes it feel more so oversaturated when there's no intentionality behind, why you might be attending. Because there are some influencers who are fashion girls down. Yeah. Like, I can't comment on it because you're doing what you need to do. You know what I mean? But at the same time, you made a really great point, because I think that there's a difference in just like how intentional you are and your reasons for being there.
Yeah, and I think that's what some of the criticism is. It's like people are inviting these like big name influencers to their show, and it's like they're not really into fashion, or it's not something that people look to for fashion, but because that's the thing. It used to be like celebrities and models, and now it's like influencer heavy. Yeah. And I think the same thing can go for like a brand. It's a lot of people will do like what they think other people want versus having like a personal identity for the brand and being able to stand out. It's like, I'm going to do what everybody else is doing because that's what I think that people like. And it's like, that's what people like because that's all that there is, pretty much. Yeah.
I do believe in people who have influence like over their audiences and genuinely can get their audience to purchase something or to be more interested in something. And there are also people who may not have that same effect. And so I think that's an interesting difference too, because influencers, they work. Like the ROI for brands is there, absolutely. You can probably pay an influencer less than you would pay like ad dollars sometimes. It depends. And you would get a more broadened reach, or if not broadened, maybe you get a more specific like niche reach just because their audience is so engaged with what they have going on. But I also think that like, I feel like that's kind of like the sweet spot, right? Like they're an influencer who has that engagement with their audience, but also it makes sense for fashion. And I think some brands can get away with it. Like maybe they're not super heavy in the fashion space, but they're a part of Fashion Week. Like I saw Monet walk for L'Oreal. Like that made sense to me. Yeah. Like maybe she's not the biggest fashion girl, but I mean, she looks good. She looks great. But also her audience goes crazy behind her. And, she's in the makeup space. So I feel like that's an example of where it makes sense. Yeah. But I also just feel like some brands aren't maybe like leveraging influencers the right way. Because as someone who works in marketing, I'm like, they work. I see it every day. Yeah. But it just may not be the best decision for every single brand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to authenticity for everything. So it's like very clear when people are just showing up to things to show up to them and not because they like genuinely want to be there or have an interest in whatever it is that the brand is doing or whatever that space is. Yeah. So I think it can be very clear when that happens.
And I love that you said authenticity. I think that's what I like about your brand the most is like I've seen the consistency over time, like you just sticking to your roots, to what you enjoy doing. What is your inspiration behind like your creativity, your designs? Like, is there anything specific that you pull from in culture and trends, or are you just like, no, this just feels like me and I'm gonna just create?
I definitely think it's a little bit of both. So I try and like look at people that I enjoy how they dress or I enjoy their style, and I kind of think of, okay, well, what would that person want to buy or what would they want to wear? But I definitely think it comes down to having a clear vision for the brand and for the company overall, and that helps you kind of decipher, okay, I really like this idea, but does that align with the direction I'm trying to go into? And I've seen like when I don't have that, or I kind of like sway from that because I'm like, oh, well, this is a popular thing, or this may be like a really good like sale, and I'm like, okay, well, then I look back and I'm like, well, I didn't really like that because that didn't really align with where I want the brand to go. So having a clear direction and kind of trying to stick to that no matter what is the biggest thing that helps the brand look consistent and is not all over the place. And then also just helps like get you in front of your ideal customers.
I was going to ask you too, that's so funny. I was going to ask you, number one, is it hard to stay locked into that like level of authenticity and consistency? And number two, I was going to ask you like, who is your ideal customer? Because I'm interested.
So I think my ideal customer is someone that loves fashion, and I just kind of put this together. So our company, House of Rehab, makes bold statement pieces that start conversations. So
y'all hear her? Y'all hear her?
So I know that like my ideal customer, they want someone to ask them, oh, where did you get that from? Or they want people to compliment them on their outfit or on their accessories. And so that kind of helps drive what type of designs I do and what goes into production. And just sticking to that, like I've had instances where I've tried something, I'm like, well, that didn't work. I'm like, of course it didn't work because it doesn't make sense with where the company is going, and just making sure the products align to that, as well as with the marketing aligns to it, the messaging, all of that just kind of makes sense.
I love that. Bold statement pieces that are conversation starters.
Yes.
So what do you feel like is most challenging about making sure that you stick to that, like making sure that you're always speaking to your target audience or your target customer? Is it like, and you did mention like you noticed when you get away from that. What does that look like when you notice?
I think again, money is always the factor. So sometimes I'm like, okay, well, like sales are down for this month. Like we need to figure something out. And then that's kind of, it's always hard when money drives your decisions, because then you can get away from what it is that you're truly supposed to be doing. So I'm like, okay, well, let me do this because I know that this will sell or this can, bring people in. And then ultimately I'm like, okay, well, now I don't want to do that anymore. That's kind of how I feel about the joggers, because people ask me about that all the time. That was like our best selling item. And now I'm just at the point where I liked it, but because it was an easy thing to do, but it's not something that I want to do, and it doesn't fit with where I want the brand to go. And even though people ask me about it all the time, I know if I wanted to make joggers tomorrow, they would sell out and I would make a lot of money. It's just like, it's not where I want the brand to go and to be. So kind of having to be like, okay, let me take money off the table and make the decision for like long term.
That's so real. Like, girl, bless your heart, because it's people out here who wouldn't care. Like, there's people out here who would just be like, look, I'm throwing this together, and I mean fast fashion, like, you can call it out, but I'm throwing this together because what matters to me is sales. I may not be speaking to one target audience specifically, but I'm speaking to trends. I'm speaking to what's going to sell out. And kudos, because that's big of you. And it's also interesting because I think that you kind of, like, what I'm hearing is like you speaking about there's the fashion side, but there's also the business side. How are you balancing that? Because they're two totally separate things. And what I'm learning is when you're creative, but you're also like inherently forced to learn about the business side of things, it's just like, God, this is hard. Like I find myself praying like, God, I need more business acumen because I want to be creative all the time. But sometimes you got to tap out of that.
I definitely think it can be a challenge. Like, I think there are some people that are like strictly creative, and then there's some people that are like very data and analytical. I think that I fall a little bit in the middle. Obviously, the creative stuff is more fun. Like, I would love to do that all day long. But the business part, especially when you're just starting a business, you can't outsource every single thing. So it's like you have to do
about to say, girl, do you have
all of the roles. And so you have to sit down and be like Fridays for me is like, okay, I need to do all the stuff that I don't enjoy doing, but I need to sit down and make sure that it gets done. And also, especially specifically for a product-based business, whatever I do creatively has to make business sense. So I may want to do all of these fun things, but if I sit down and look at it like, okay, this costs too much, this is more than what our customers are willing to pay, or if I order this isn't gonna sell, or this particular color doesn't do well for us. So you do have to balance out whatever you do creatively has to make some type of sense for the business, because otherwise you're not in business.
And I think too, like, what I really hear you saying is like really looking into the data, like digging into it, and not being afraid to uncover what it means. I think sometimes we see failure and we stop. Like, we see failure, we stop there, and we don't move past it and enter the next step, which is uncovering why that thing didn't work, so that the next thing you do will work. And for some reason, I don't know why we do that, but for some reason, it's like, you're supposed to fail sometimes. Actually, you're supposed to fail and honestly do it quickly. fail, do it quickly, get past it, uncover the data, and then move forward. So I love hearing that you know those things about your business. Obviously, like you're an entrepreneur, you're a business owner, but again, it just speaks to like how dedicated to this thing you are. Because a lot of times we don't look at it like that, especially like being on the creator side, for example, creating content. Some people just create content, put it out there, and then move on to the next thing. And they might find themselves creating the same thing and it's not working, but not really tapping into why it's not working. I was there for a long time. And it honestly took me being in the literal like marketing, advertising space for other brands. Like I'm doing this as my job to realize like, oh, that's an important part of the business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you said earlier, learning that there were things that existed in your corporate job that you could implement in your business. Like I think that is the number one way to learn. And so many people put down working 9 to 5s or, you know, having jobs because entrepreneurship is where it's at. And it's like, sometimes you just gotta be more strategic about it.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think like you can learn from whatever environment you're in. So you may not like that job, but what can I use from it to implement in my business or whatever it is that I have going on so that I can eventually leave.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have a team?
So primarily right now it's just me. And then I do have like assistants for like customer service and some like shipping help. But for the most part, it's just me. Yeah.
Girl, you are doing it. It's time for us to get us a couple virtual assistants. We need to send them over your way.
Yeah.
I know. You're like, yeah, we need these sales to go up. But I feel you 100%. Because I think sometimes our first instinct is like, how can I get more help? Like, how can I invest in more outsourcing, more hands? But when you are selling a product, I can also see how that's like not a downside, but the product comes first at the end of the day. Whereas, you know, things where I can always go back to content, but when you're creating content, you can kind of like edit it yourself, but you're not buying a product, you're not shipping it out. You know what I mean? So I can see how that's a lot of different layers to uncover there for sure.
Yeah, and I've hired people for certain things, and then like recently this year I was just like, I need to do this myself.
Yeah.
Because especially until I like get the brand exactly where I want it to be, like nobody else is going to understand that like I am. So I need to just do it myself.
Yeah. What were the areas where you're like, I want to do this myself because maybe someone else doesn't know it as well? Or I want to like maybe be able to like explain it better when I bring someone on, you know?
It would definitely just be the marketing aspect of it. And it's like, it's outsourcing it because I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. But it's like, I can do this myself. I know what it is that I want this to look like or how I want this to sound. So I need to just do it myself instead of trying to like depend on other people. They may be experts at what they do, but for this, I need to do it for myself right now.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, that can be expensive too. I'm going to be honest with you. Like being in a space where that is my full-time job, like because I'm a social strategist, like that's what I do in my 9 to 5, right? I work in-house for a brand, but when I was working for an agency, like you see how expensive it is to bring in an agency and market for you. Like that is definitely hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes in the millions. You know what I mean? And these are for obviously like bigger household name brands. But when you think about the level of just like particularness, I guess, that comes with having a brand, whether it is a small business or whatever, and you kind of putting that trust into someone else's hands, like I would want to vet. Like I would want to know results. I would want to know, you know, what are you doing for other clients? And there's also that piece of learning a brand. Like I always say, when I start a new role, especially as it relates to working with other brands, I need like 6 months to truly understand the brand, to know their tone of voice, to understand like their offerings, their products. If, you know, let's say they're consumer packaged goods or they just have some other form of product, it takes a while. Like you have to do a little digging. You have to execute a few things, like a few campaigns to just like be like, okay, I got this. But it's not overnight. And so I think that it's a balance between the brand or the owner knowing that it takes a little while, but also for the person, the creative executing on the marketing side to know like you got to give yourself grace because it does take some time.
Yeah. And I think it's very easy to like come in and think like, okay, I did this for this brand, so let me just apply that to here and we should be good to go. And it's like, No, that doesn't work though.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's not a one size fits all approach
Mm-hmm.
at all. And I was actually going to ask you, like, what marketing strategies did you use to grow the business,
Mm-hmm.
especially like in the early stages? Because now it sounds like you are kind of leaning into that yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But in the beginning, was that something you were intentional about too?
I would definitely say in the beginning, it was just all over the place. I was learning what to do. When I really got serious about the business, I think the main thing is like being in the spaces of where your ideal customer is. So that's kind of like going to Fashion Week. I have a fashion brand. I create products for people that would be in those spaces. So I need to make sure that I'm there so that people are aware of the brand or aware of the products that we have. Doing certain events or going to certain places where those customers are, I think is important, and that just helps with like people being aware of who you are. And of course, you can do ads, you can do all that stuff, but like word of mouth is the biggest thing. And so, being in those spaces where your customer is always the number one thing.
When we were talking influencers earlier, I was going to ask you, do you work with any influencers or ambassadors?
So I have, but not on the level where like. I always say I don't want to be a Fashion Nova where I'm like here, like just handing out discount codes to everything.
Okay.
Like that's just not me. And I think because the brand is like very like close to me, like it's like my kid. So I've always been like very particular about that. We've worked with people like one off. It's something I may like explore more, but not in the like traditional sense of like just handing out discount codes to people and doing that. It's like more curated.
Yeah,
stuff.
for sure. I get that. And I like it. There's a level of like exclusiveness to that too.
Yeah.
Like when you're ready, obviously it'll make sense for the brand. But right now it's like, you know, it's exclusive. Like it's for the girls that get it and the girls who don't, they don't. Like, I love that. I love that. Yes. Well, I definitely appreciate you for being here and talking to us. I want to know though, for any listeners who, I mentioned this before, but any listeners who might be interested in starting their journey, who might be on their journey, do you have any advice, words of encouragement, like any heads up that you would want to share?
I would just say again, like have a clear direction or a clear vision on what it is that you're trying to create. And then I always like whatever you do something, I always try and take a step back and be like, okay, how can I make this just a little bit more special or just a little bit nicer? And I think that doing that extra step is kind of like what can set you apart or just make whatever it is that you're doing like 10 times better.
I love that. I love that. Are there any projects that you're working on that we can be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so I would definitely say for going into 2024, I'm definitely looking to like reestablish the brand and just make a clear like statement on what the company is and what we stand for, and that's going to show in the products that we release. So just like kind of not starting fresh or starting new, but just like being clear about what House of Rehab is. So that's what I'm looking for.
Yes. Okay, so as you know, this is the Minor Detail Podcast. Yes. So my last and final question for you, if you had to leave listeners with, which I feel like you kind of already did, but let's broaden it. If you had to leave them with one minor detail or the minor detail that maybe helped you along your journey, is present in your life right now, like what would that thing be?
I would definitely say, I feel like what's gotten me to this place is just being true to myself and not trying to be everything or do like what people tell me to do, even if they are experts at what they do. I have a very clear idea of who I am and what it is that I'm trying to create. And so I just try and like stick to that, because whenever I have wavered from that, it has not worked out. So sticking to the plan is like my biggest thing.
Stick to the plan, be yourself. I love it. Well, y'all have it. Ashlee, you came in, you said what you had to say, you like, I'm out. Like, I love it. It's like efficient, but impactful. You know what I mean? And I think like that speaks all over you. Like it speaks all over your brand. Like you don't do too much. It's very like, I wouldn't call it simple at all, but that like bold minimal, or the new word is maximalist, I think. I was going to say bold minimalism, but the new word is maximalist. Like that's what you're giving me right now. Okay, lastly, where can listeners find you?
So the brand is House of Rehab. We're House of Rehab on Instagram. The website is House of Rehab. And then for me, is Ashlee Made Me Do It on Instagram.
And that's Ashlee with 2 E's,
Yes.
just so y'all know.
Yes.
ASHLEE. We get names right around here, okay? But thank you. Thank you for being here. This was amazing.
Yes.
We're gonna have to get together again or something.
Yes.
We're in the same city, so
Yes.
that's what makes it so beautiful.
Yes.
Y'all be on the lookout. If you are in Dallas, though, I know you do pop-ups here and there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, y'all definitely be on the lookout. I'm including all of the details in the show notes, so y'all better go shop with my girl, okay? We are going into the new year, into 2024. Like she said, she's coming bold, better than ever. And we can't wait to just watch you and support you.
Thank you.
I love it. Thank y'all for tuning in. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.